So good afternoon to all. Let me begin by indicating it's a distinct honor and privilege to address you in this land whose slogan is one people, one nation, one destiny. And I want to say indeed that is a fitting summary of who we are and who we can be. So I want to begin first by thanking President of the Republic of Guyana, the African Export-Import Bank, and the conference organizers for extending an invitation to the Caribbean Development Bank to join you in these deliberations. So today, we gathered to explore ways to overcome financing constraints and propose innovative, future-fit solutions to facilitate the blossoming and blooming of Africa-Caribbean trade and investment cooperation. In fact, let me state at the outset that I view this as an investment opportunity in altering the narrative of the Middle Passage to the creation of a future path underwritten by unity, solidarity, and partnership to harness the potential of our collective creativity and ingenuity. Consequently, my remarks today will be set in the realm of how we can use trade to move our economies from the periphery to the center. So let's establish at the beginning that at CDB, trade is considered a central pathway to the transformational agenda of our economies. Now, this is not a new insight. In fact, it's always been that. Indeed, throughout our historical journey, trade and commerce have always been instrumental in knitting our societies together, fostering development, and most importantly, in shifting powers. However, trade between the Caribbean and Africa has traditionally been modest. According to a 2022 International Trade Center study, less than 1% of exports are exchanged between the two regions. This must change. In the next 5 years, the potential exists to transform this ratio to 25% in both directions between the regions. This potential cooperation, especially in agriculture, energy, tourism, and technology, can reframe the existing account of the Middle Passage from one of pain, trauma, and trafficking in black bodies to one of trade, technology, and geopolitical strength. Bolstering trade is mission critical for our countries to move from the periphery to the center. Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa details how colonialism and economic controls influenced the continent's underdevelopment. Countries in Africa were seen primarily as sources of raw material for European industries, with little reverse direction investment. Growth trajectories were further disrupted through the imposition of external systems, leaving these countries anchored firmly in the periphery. In the Caribbean, we suffered a similar fate, producing sugar and other commodities for export, only to be relegated to the periphery when the center changed their appetites and could source those products more cheaply elsewhere. But it didn't end there. In the post-slavery, post-colonial era, our economies are still organized in the context and construct of a plantation economy, of course, minus the forced labor. Sustained colonial ties, the continued provision of goods and services to a center, mostly Europe, and required compliance with international rules have meant that the region has remained structurally dependent on an external center and being constrained in achieving economic growth and human development. By now, it is no secret that trade between our two regions has challenges, including inadequate transport links between Africa and the Caribbean, tariffs, customs procedures, and differing regulatory standards, pricing competition from larger economies that overshadow bilateral trade facilitation, and an understandable lack of appreciation that transitions to development may require choices that ought to view prices from a longer-run dependency and sustainability perspective, and less so on today's purchasing power. The question is, how do we chart a different future and identify solutions that will change our situation? My friends, trade by its very nature is not just an exchange of commodities. It is an exchange of culture, knowledge, and progress. Both Africa and the Caribbean share a common past marked by struggle, resilience, and a continuous quest for self-definition. Our intertwined histories, born of resistance to subjugation, provide the bedrock upon which we can forge an economic partnership. Increasing trade between Africa and the Caribbean means fortifying shared histories, strengthening shared values, and developing shared visions. This translates to customizing our peculiarities to advance our circumstances, embracing resilient prosperity, technological growth, and the elevation of our shared global stance. I ask you to indulge me by closing your eyes and picture trade first as economic resilience. When we unlock the potential of intercontinental trade, we open doors to trade creation, technological advancement, and infrastructural development. So let us reimagine a future where African technology startups are commonplace in the Caribbean, and Caribbean agricultural produce is a staple in African households. Now picture trade as a socio-political shift. By enhancing trade, we indirectly fortify our global position, moving our countries from being mere spectators to active participants in the global narrative. A united Afro-Caribbean bloc can redefine global trade dynamics, making our voices heard in international forums and shifting the balance of power. Picture trade as a power of innovative resilience. Innovation is not just a buzzword, but the lifeblood of thriving economies, especially for developing nations in Africa and the Caribbean. Nobel laureate Sir Arthur Lewis once remarked, "The fundamental cure for poverty is not money, but knowledge." Indeed, it is this very knowledge, this spirit of innovation, that we must harness and cultivate. And let us be clear, we do not have a comparative disadvantage in knowledge creation. In fact, our knowledge capacity can be our playing field leveler on the global stage, converting challenges into opportunities. Picture now the concept of building prosperity through resilience, which is not just about accumulating wealth, but ensuring that our growth is resilient to shocks, ensuring our prosperity is sustainable over the long run. However, resilience and prosperity are intertwined. To attain and sustain prosperity, we must be resilient. And the key to resilience is innovation, which can be achieved in our minds only through an ecosystem approach. And there are 4 elements to this. The first is, to innovate, we need to be able to measure better. Refining our metrics, understanding better our specific circumstances, and then directing investments more strategically, ensuring that each dollar is truly fit for its intended purpose. In this regard, I propose that we commit the next decade to a regional connectivity transformative backbone, a world where all of our countries are seamlessly connected in the following areas. Energy connectivity, where sustainable energy resources are shared, harnessing the abundance of one region to address the deficit of another. Digital connectivity, where broadband networks bridge information gaps, fostering knowledge and technology transfer. And transport connectivity, with integrated air and marine logistics, enabling swift, efficient movement and thereby accelerating trade and integration. So that's the first measure. The second is financing. There we need to address the point that is our Achilles heel: vulnerability and resilience, because that is what is not captured in any of the instruments we have. So I propose we introduce a wide class of contingent financing instruments tailored to mitigate risks, the de-risking that the minister spoke about, tailored to mitigate risks from our high structural vulnerabilities and low resilience, thereby optimizing the use of our abundant regional resources. The third, capacity building. Re-engineer traditional training programs to empower our people to think creatively, act decisively, and break the shackle of dependency. Let us therefore commit to investment in capacity building, making it an inherent component of every phase in the investment cycle. And fourth, partnerships. Sharing responsibilities and burdens through dynamic partnerships in knowledge creation, in financing, in technology sharing, and in productivity enhancing methods. So you may ask, how can we achieve these crucial innovations? We propose a framework that targets real development outcomes and the means to finance and implement these through promoting complementary efforts instead of constrained from siloed perspectives of private and public sector domains, until we break the silo, the distrust between the public and the private sector, and forge a complementary, harmonious relationship to deal with national goals. We will not have the public-private partnerships that we need to embrace. That is the essence of the New Deal between the private and the public sectors that we speak about. The finance required, to be honest, is more than any one institution can provide. It is more than any one instrument can facilitate. Therefore, we at the CDB have proposed a multi-source, multi-instrument approach, underpinned in partnership by an appropriate market infrastructure and good practice regulatory and governance frameworks. Therefore, we equally propose, by working collaboratively, CDB and Afri-Exim Bank can transition our countries to the heart of global economic dynamics, recast our economies from the periphery to the center, and fostering investment initiatives that promote SDGs and transform the lives of our people. And to be able to do all of that, let me share with you a few financing solutions. One, a trade facilitation and export promotion fund that will offer low-interest loans, credit guarantees, or grants to businesses. And I would urge, let us move with urgency to establish and finance it. Second, promote venture capital and private equity funds with a focus on trade between Africa and the Caribbean. These funds can offer financial support, mentorship, and market access in renewable energy, connectivity, food security, digitalization, and climate mitigation and adaptation. Very specific. Fourth, we need to grow a regional resource mobilization ecosystem that will allow deployment of regional resources. Redeploy our national insurance funds, the credit union deposits, the funds that are sitting in the commercial banks, in the assets under management. Redeploy those to effect our development agenda. Make it finance with a purpose. And lastly, support an increase in the use of fintech to promote the use of digital payments, peer-to-peer lending platforms, and supply chain financing. So as I conclude, I invite us to create the future we want and need. A future where every country, irrespective of size or wealth, plays an integral role in the collective, integrated march towards resilient prosperity. For us, this is not just a vision. It is a mission requiring our collective effort. Let us therefore commit today to not just talking the talk, but to laying of flagstones along the path to resilient prosperity. But let us equally commit to bringing our people along with us every step of this journey, as ultimately they are the ones who must benefit from everything that we do. Thank you.
Dr. Leon, thank you very much for the minutes, the extra minutes that you took. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I have only 30 minutes to have a very important conversation. We'll get right to it. Please give an Afro-Caribbean warm welcome to my first panelist, Miss Patricia R. Francis, CD, who is the chairperson, Trade Facilitation Task Force, Government of Jamaica. It needs to be louder than that, everybody. We've just had lunch. Please also welcome Dr. Gobind Ganga, Governor, Bank of Guyana. The Governor of the Central Bank of Barbados is with us. Please welcome Dr. Greenidge. The Acting Director, Trade and Corporate Finance, Afrexim Bank, Mr. Ayman El Zogbi. Please welcome Mr. Chris Oshiafi, Group Managing Director, Pan-African Capital Holdings. Last, definitely not the least, please welcome Mr. Floyd Haynes, Chairman, New Haven Merchant Bank, Guyana. One, two. Ladies and gentlemen, please another round of applause for my panelists. Patricia, it is cold here, isn't it, being the only two women on the panel? But let's make it warm, and let me start off with you. Now, I would like to know, we're talking about opportunity, we're also talking about challenges, obviously. Patricia, in your mind, where do you think the greatest opportunity to move the needle between the Caribbean and Africa is?
Is this working?
It is working.
Great. Thank you very much, and very pleased to be here. From my perspective, where I sit, I really do believe that we have to start from investment. That's where I think we have an opportunity, because we have a number, both regions have companies, strong companies, that can actually play in this area. And I think infrastructure is where we ought to start. And it's a great platform. We could talk about, we've heard everybody talking about the deficit in both sides. So whether it is we're talking about ports, telecoms, services of all sorts, the oil and gas industry, or whether we're talking about our large local companies that are doing consumer goods or fintech payments and things like that, insurance, banking. These are companies that can come together to look at the projects that actually are on the ground that need to be financed. And I believe that if we can get these companies together, that indeed you can build a kind of trust and confidence, which is important to build any kind of trade on. We're not going to see trade moving exponentially unless we can build that trust and confidence. And I think, you know, if we take Jamaica for an example, I am part of a company called Jamaica Producers, which is now Pan Jamaica Group. And we have been investing in Africa for a long time. We've been buying bananas out of Cameroon for ages. We have the largest fresh fruit juice company in Europe, and we buy fruit from Africa, but we don't count that as being Caribbean. So, you know, Grace Kennedy, others are doing the same kind of thing. Now, how do we, you know, we're sort of behaving like Europeans, but how do we transform that relationship which we currently have into something which we can build together between the two continents, the continent and this region, where we can actually scale up, as Mia Motley was saying, into new things and build on the areas that we really need to build on. And I think, of course, private equity is one of those things that we just spoke about, and that's Dr. Leander spoke about, and that's something which I think is really important. Of course, I also speak on behalf of Portland Private Equity, which is launching a new fund now, and this can be something which can be utilized to finance some of these entrepreneurs that we think are important in the region. So I think investment, let's look at investment. Let's look at the projects. How can we use the capital markets that we currently have, the innovation that we currently have, and take that and move with that? Because I think that's the low-hanging fruit.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Ganga, I bring this conversation to you. We're looking at that double bottom line. We're looking at Africa's prosperity. We're also looking at Caribbean's prosperity. But in there, we've heard the word sharing, shared experiences, shared everything. What would be the value of perhaps opening up a dialogue, sharing information between our central banks?
Thank you. Madam Moderator, you have been doing an excellent job so far.
Thank you very much.
For some reason, I thought you were Guyanese. Anyhow, we all know globalization has been connecting us ever more than what we would have expected. That is, we are more now connected with respect to our country and the world. With this partnership moving forward, that is this Caribbean, African continent, our region, obviously, and the African continent can benefit tremendously from mutual prosperity. To begin with, a forum of central bank governors or central bankers of this region and that of the continent would obviously bring tremendous benefit from the perspective of, say, sharing of information. That is economic information, financial information, information that will inform stakeholders in terms of where opportunities are and how to overcome challenges. The sharing of information is also very important because what it will provide regulatory framework and governance standards that are mutually beneficial and would be what we call cross-border standards, which are acceptable worldwide. Because if we're going to have this kind of a relationship with respect to trade and investment, all stakeholders need to be told, yes, we have certain standards that we have to follow. And these standards are very important for success in terms of whatever transactions are being undertaken. A forum of central bankers would not only provide for, say, regulatory standard from the perspective of financial stability, but it will help mitigate, for example, arbitrage with respect to regulation. And here I'm getting into a new phase or the new thought process or the new sexy things that is happening, that is digitalization. All of us know that digitalization is globalization. in a different form and way. Digitalization requires a certain type of regulation. And these regulations obviously need cooperation. And that is where, for example, a forum of central bankers will ensure that there is no arbitrage with respect to regulation, especially from the perspective of digitalization. We also have to look at cooperation, how it can help in capacity development, how it can help in terms of sharing of technology. Because obviously, if we are not up there technologically speaking, we are not going to benefit from whatever opportunity is going to be offering to us. Other regions will come in and they will be able to, I would say, just between our legs, take away whatever opportunities are offered. So from the perspective of cooperation, we need to have such a forum. It's very important. And I could tell you, if you're going to have any success in any way, or people who are actively involved to ensure that success will happen, it will be the central bankers.
Thank you so much. Dr. Greenwich, we are hearing about standardization. Standardization. What element of perhaps currency can be included in this conversation about standardization? Can we perhaps, Caribbean, Africa, can we trade in our own local currencies? Can that be our standard?
Good evening. Thank you very much for the question. I don't think it is a matter of can we think. Yes, definitely we can, and we're on our way to doing that. I think it's a necessary part of the integration process. It's already happening among the African countries via the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System. To have that between Caribbean and African continent, that currency conversion mechanism is what we have agreed at the level of the governors in principle, that we will look to adopt this payment system, which allows, in the first stage, us in the Caribbean to buy and sell goods and services using our own local currency, and if we adopt the system. And that in of itself not only promotes growth in terms of trade and investment facilitation, it also eliminates transaction costs. Since it's a settlement in the net position, it saves us some foreign currency. It promotes financial inclusion. We don't have to source US dollars when trading between Guyana, for example, and Barbados. We can settle in each other's currency. Now we're looking to start a pilot program, Barbados and Bahamas, and we're looking for a third central bank in the region to come in, so we... A third central bank. I don't want to put my brother under pressure to come in with us, because we have to iron out the kinks in it and see how it works, etc. In my belief, and we have a meeting early in November and probably discuss it in Jamaica this week, how to move forward. Once we have that working in the region, and it will facilitate growth and development, then the next step will be how to make it work across our continents. It goes on to what Brother Gobin was saying in terms of corporations. We have to have functional cooperation between the central banks in the African continent and the Caribbean in terms of standardization, regulations, how any regulatory barriers, etc., to move forward. We've already, a number of us have these relationships already, but it will be making it even wider. And once that's up and running, then it's just go from there. We need, of course, some trade agreements, and Africa Exempt Bank in the Caribbean and Barbados is part of that process, facilitating it. As Jean Leon said earlier, we need some financing facilities. The agreement that was signed in last year early, before to pave the way for Africa Exempt Bank to be part of Barbados, was a framework agreement. And then that sets out agreements which Jean Leon talked about, where funds like credit facilities, guarantee facilities, those things we have to work with the African Exempt Bank to try to pave out. That will also help with the movement and facilitating that trade, guarantees, supporting, etc. So the answer to your question is a resounding yes. And the second thing is that we're on our way doing it. We have to work it out. And it's going to be, in my view, two-phase, but it's the future. It's where we have to go.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Chris, may I bring this conversation to you where I would like you to share from the perspective of our SMEs. I genuinely, deeply believe that the foundation that is being laid and the pillars that are being moved or built primarily depend on the success of our SMEs, our entrepreneurs. How does this group or do these groups take advantage of the opportunities that we're seeing in this exemplary trade and investment between the Caribbean and Africa? And can we find enough funding to push them along?
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Talking about SMEs, I think it's important to put it in context and describe the important role that the SMEs actually play, especially in both regions, in Africa and in the Caribbean. They have very similar characteristics. Close to 90% of the jobs created in these regions are usually by SMEs. Close to 40% of the national income in both regions by the SMEs. So that underscores how important it is that the SMEs are properly funded and the SMEs are properly designed to work well. But I think it's not just for us to focus on the trade between Africa and the Caribbean. It's also important to take a step back and also focus on the trade within Africa itself as a starting point, and the trade within the Caribbean communities itself, which statistics will tell you is extremely low at this point. Economies that have developed because they trade with themselves. North America, if you look at the US, Canada, and Mexico, trades about 69% with itself. Asia trades about 63% with itself. Europe trades about 71% with itself, and that again tells you why you see the kind of development and the kind of infrastructure that supports SMEs. Africa, by the last estimates, perhaps trades about 18-20% with itself. And the Caribbeans, I can tell you that the trade is actually low between themselves. I flew straight in here from Jamaica because in Pan-African Capital, we just invested in a Jamaican fund alongside the Jamaican Development Bank. Now, the essence of that fund is an SME fund that is meant to help the SMEs to push forward. And in most of the meetings I had while in Jamaica for 2 days, I found out that if you look at Jamaica, if you look at Dominican Republic, and you look at Haiti, and if you extend it to, say, Cuba, you have about 35 million people in those regions. My inquiries didn't tell me that there was so much trade going on in those regions. We need to also look at how can SMEs in those regions trade, because that's a very huge market. And also, without taking anything off the table, look at the trade between Africa and the Caribbean. But to answer your question directly, the issue of funding for them is important. Now, these are sets of businesses that don't have what the big corporations have. First, they don't have collaterals to give. So how do you support them? So it's important that we create funds, like the last keynote speaker mentioned, create funds that will help, venture capital funds that will help these SMEs. And we realize that most of them actually do not have what it takes to actually prepare before going into these businesses. There are certain project preparations that you should do. How many of them can take the liberty of doing feasibility studies? How many of them have what it takes to invest in CapEx for these businesses? Most times, they get into asset-light businesses, which means that they need a lot of support from factoring businesses. How many factoring businesses do we have? How many people are doing forfeiting in the region? Factoring, forfeiting, and a lot of support from maybe microfinance banks, and then having government also support them in terms of creating the necessary infrastructure is what I think most of the SMEs will need to be able to conquer the problems that apply to SMEs in both regions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oshefe. Thank you very much. Mr. Haynes, I want to bring it to you. You know, we're talking obviously about trade, so clearly we can't have this conversation without talking about the commercial banks, obviously. Now, when it comes to the commercial banks, what would you say the extent of their role is in both, either region or both, in supporting this partnership between Africa and the Caribbean?
Thank you. Am I mic'd? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think the role, well, we're not a commercial bank. We're a merchant bank, investment bank. But nonetheless, I'll talk a little bit about it. I think the role is as a facilitator. I think what we have to have are institutional arrangements that allow businesses from the Caribbean to interact with businesses in Africa, perhaps an Afri-Caribbean Chamber of Commerce, something like that. It seems like to me that, so the concept of globalization is the transfer of capital, labor, and information across national boundaries. I don't see that happening. I don't think we have the institutional arrangements in place to do that. So that's one thing I would address. A second thing I would address is the regulatory framework. Take the case of Guyana. Guyana is growing exponentially by leaps and bounds since its discovery of oil in the Atlantic Basin. And what has happened, the business environment has changed, and the demands on institutions providing capital has changed, but the culture and the behavior is lagged behind. It hasn't really caught up with that. And so the regulatory, and there are several regulators on stage here, but the regulatory environment has to be nimble and has to be able to adapt to a changing environment. As it relates to the SMEs, what they need is capacity building. Most of the small businesses, or the MSEs, are what I would consider the core competence model business. And let me unpack that. The core competence model is where you have a skilled person, an electrician, a plumber, a construction worker, and he or she is extremely knowledgeable in that trade. But that in and of itself is not a business. A business has an ecosystem around it, right? And so we look at things like, what are your business analytics? Do you have management accounts? Do you have audited statements? Do you have a CFO? Do you have a legal representation? Do you have a management structure? All of those things together serves to institutionalize the core competence business model. And that's the kind of things investors are looking for. Oftentimes, businesses come into the bank, they're looking for capital, but they're not packaged for financing and capital. We don't make loans, we make investments. And money goes where it's treated best. And capital is not charity. Okay, and so risks has to be mitigated. And one of the ways I think we do that is to provide the necessary capacity building that can institutionalize these individuals with various expertise.
Thank you so much. Would you say you can throw in the investment banking angle as well?
Yes, yes. I would, go ahead, sorry.
No, how would you do that? Go ahead, please.
Say that again?
Throw in the investment banking angle as well in terms of facilitating this relationship.
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. The investment bank, and we do it, so there's an educational process, right? A small business walks in the door and they're looking for capital. And you have to take a step back and say, okay, have you had a business valuation? Do you have a business plan? We can help you with that. And so while we're arranging and structuring capital, we're also teaching in the process and bringing them along. And that's the role of the investment bank. It's to provide the necessary tools and resources that the SME is looking for, but they may not have. Again, they have the core competence, they're probably extremely good at it, but that ecosystem that surrounds that core competence has to be built up. And we as an investment bank, because we're not constrained by the regulation, we can offer that.
Right.
The commercial banks or retail banks can't necessarily offer that.
Okay. Dr. Ganga was looking at you from the corner of his eye, but that's fine. Now, Ayman, I saved you for last because your shoulders feel they're getting heavier and heavier because Afro-Exim has done so well to create opportunities to bridge this relationship. Your office is in Barbados at the moment. How does that proximity help and facilitate, or better still, accelerate this conversation we're having?
No, thank you very much for your question. And I thank you for your passion moderating this session. Really, you brought life to the room. And we like that passion, and we embrace this kind of passion at Afro-Exim in pursuing whatever we want to do.
Thank you. It's a Ghana thing.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
No, in Afro-Exim, let me tell you something first. 8 years ago at Afro-Exim, we started a journey of promoting intra-African trade and investment. And while everybody was talking about that the main obstacle to intra-African trade is the lack of infrastructure, we didn't listen to any of that, because we believe that the main obstacle to intra-African trade is the lack of market information, the lack of access to finance, and the perceived market risk on the continent. And we said to ourselves, well, we can do something about that. And that's where we started our journey to promote intra-African trade and investment. We've covered the gap of market information. We brought Africans together, closer. We brought opportunities closer to our clients. We brought African governments together to have a dialogue and conversation on how to integrate and become more, increase the level of intra-African trade. And in doing that, we have innovatively created a lot of new products and programs that are tailor-made specifically for that purpose. And when we decided to come to the Caribbean region, to integrate the region with Africa, everybody also told us that there is no single link between Africa and the Caribbean. What are you guys doing? And guess what? Again, we didn't listen to any of that, and we came. And we came very strongly. We used our experience and used the impact that we've done across the continent promoting intra-African trade. We used that experience into integrating the Caribbean region as well. And the very first thing we did, we came very strongly with our clients, we came with our investors into the region to explore opportunities, and so many opportunities, so many investment opportunities have come up, and we're really amazed about the kind of things that we can do here. And again, we're tweaking our products and programs to fit now those kinds of opportunities and to fit the opportunities that we see in the market here. And that's why you will see us doing quite a lot in less than a year. We are in more than 6 countries of the region, and we are signing transactions, and we're doing a lot of financing. But our role really expands beyond that. Our role really is to promote the linkages between the continent and the Caribbean region, and also the linkages among the Caribbean region itself. And that's why you find so many of our clients here with us. They come, we have clients from Egypt, where I come from. They come with us, and every time we come to the Caribbean, as if they are going from Egypt to Sudan. It has become that close to them, believing in the bank and believing what the role of the bank is doing in the region, and that's really what we are trying to do. And we have our branch in Barbados now open and operative, and this gives us a lot of opportunity to examine the market closer and to identify opportunities in a deeper way, and also to develop the relationship in the region in a better way. And you will hear a lot of the transactions that we'll be doing in the near future.
Ayman, thank you so much. It's so exciting. I've got only 1 minute and 52. Patricia, it would be remiss for me not, on the behalf of the women in this room, to mention. Ladies, are you there? Thank you. Patricia, all of this sounds extraordinary. How do the women take advantage just to make sure that in this newfound partnership, in this new extraordinary making of prosperity, that we don't get left behind?
Well, I think it's important to note that women currently only control less than 10% of the capital in the Caribbean. I'm not sure what the number is in Africa, but I would be surprised if the number was larger. So we already have a situation where 80% of our graduates from university are women, but why is that not translating into capital appreciation for women? So I think one has to, when you examine that, what are the things that we have to do? And some of them have actually been mentioned with respect to the kinds of action that you need to take with respect to SMEs. Not much different. But then you have to focus them on the women themselves. Make sure that you actually have organizations that are dedicating their services to women. That capacity building is important. The mentorship, the networking, all of these things, the education about financial literacy, these are all fundamental things that need to change. And of course, women are generally risk averse, and they're prefer to be a manager than to go out and become an entrepreneur. So, I mean, that's one class of our women. But at the bottom of the pyramid, our women are entrepreneurs. The vendor who is out there every day, how do you translate that woman into being an entrepreneur? And so I think, there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of work being done in all of in both regions. And I see, the famous lady here from Egypt who has been talking about this forever. And, so we have to work. We have to do the fundamental work. And, people criticize, why is it that we talk about gender? Well, when you look at the data tells the truth. And we have to collect the data. When you collect the data, then you can take the actions. And I think this is critical and important. And just a little plug, our Portland's third fund that we're putting together, we have one part of it which is going to be dedicated to women-owned enterprises. And this has already been launched. And so that will include a whole building of an ecosystem around the women-owned enterprises to make sure that they succeed. So, this is the kind of thing that we have to do.
Thank you, Patricia. And still, since I have the microphone and I can't be fired at this point, perhaps also to say to His Excellency Professor Orama, maybe you can create a special $1 billion women's fund. Women, help me, because when I get fired, it's because of you. Thank you, Professor Orama. As you are clapping, sir, I know you will do it before, as His Excellency the President said, before the end of the forum, please. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for my panelists, Ms. Patricia Francis, Chairperson, Trade Facilitation Task Force, Government of Jamaica. We have also the Governor of the Bank of Guyana, Dr. Gobind Ganga. We have the Governor, Central Bank of Barbados, Dr. Kevin Greenwich. We also had Mr. Ayman El-Zovi, Acting Director, Trade and Corporate Finance, Afrexim Bank. Mr. Chris Oshiafi, Group Managing Director, Pan-African Capital Holdings. Last not the least, Mr. Floyd Haynes, Chairman, New Haven Merchant Bank, Guyana. And my name is Anita Erskine from... Ladies and gentlemen, God bless you all. And ladies and gentlemen, I believe that there's a deal signing right after this, so please do not go anywhere. Thank you very much. Chris.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That concludes session 2, a discussion of options for overcoming financial and financing constraints to Afro-Caribbean Trade and Investment Corporation. At this time, we're going to move gently along to our deal signing. And we're about to witness the signing of the Lagos Heads of Terms documents. And at this time, I would like to invite Mr. Peter Olawononi, Head of Client Relations of Afrexim Bank. Put your hands together, ladies and gentlemen.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The deal we'll be signing today is very strategic for Afreximbank because this financing is basically taking financing closer to the people by supporting the sub-sovereigns. It's been in the works together with the Lagos State government and our strategic partner, Axis Bank, and we'll be having a signing where we'll be essentially providing the equivalent of $1.352 billion in local currency in support of Lagos State government of Nigeria to support key trade-enabling infrastructure, which will help promote industrialization and export manufacturing. It will help create roads to link up productive centers with areas of consumption and areas of processing. And it importantly will also create hubs, trade hubs, which will help the state disseminate and empower its people. I will be inviting His Excellency, Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu, to the podium. Professor Benedict Orama, President of Afreximbank, and Mr. Dr. Herbert Wigwe, I correct myself, the GCAO of Access Holdings. Thank you very much. Just to read very quickly, the Afreximbank, along with Access Bank, is signing a 1.352 billion heads of terms to be provided in local currency to support Lagos State government, to support key trade-enabling infrastructure, including the Lagos 37-kilometer Fourth Mainland Bridge, the Omo Creek 5.1-kilometer highway, the Lekki-Epe International Airport, the Lagos State 27-kilometer rail mass transit blue line, and importantly, the Lagos Food Systems and Logistics Hub. Afreximbank is partnering with Access Bank PLC under its strategy for the African sub-sovereign governments, which is an ingenious strategic initiative by the bank aimed at firmly establishing intra-continental trade investment through supporting trade and investment at deeper levels of citizen administration. Lagos State will be able to fully realize its potential under the African Continental Free Trade Agreement through this facility that is being signed today, the heads of terms, which will basically dictate the final terms that will be, the bank will be arranging the facility. And it's a big signing. We have the three principals signing on behalf of Lagos State government, the Afreximbank, and Access Holdings. Can we put our hands together, please? We have the ink on the paper done by the Lagos State governor. Is it done yet? Not yet. We haven't, yeah. This is the first of its kind for Afreximbank. It's novel and will be helping to push the frontiers of the sub-sovereigns. And we will be having an exchange and handshakes after the ink has been put on paper. Handshake between the Lagos State governor. Pictures. Thank you. And here we have it, $1.352 billion in local currency to be availed to Lagos State government to drive key infrastructural projects to promote trade and trade-enabling infrastructure for Lagos State. Congratulations, Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu. Congratulations, President. Yes. Thank you.
Governor Lagos wants to laminate it.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for witnessing such a monumental moment today. Can I? Oh, okay.
Sounded like you're a politician.
Okay. Should I keep you an MC? Okay, well, thank you. And they'll be joined by our Executive Vice President for Intra-African Trade Bank, under whose purview this strategic initiative sits.
Definitely a big sign in there. And as we continue, just a reminder that His Excellency Dr. Mohamed Irfan Ali, President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, cordially invites you to a welcome reception on the occasion of Afro-Caribbean Trade and Investment Forum 2023. And that's tonight at 7 p.m. at State House in Georgetown. And though you may not have received a physical invitation, for those of you who haven't, once you have your conference badge, that is your access to get into the welcome reception. So once again, make sure you walk with your conference badge, 7 p.m. at State House, Georgetown. At this time, we move gently on to session number 3. Now, according to U.S. Army General John Pershing, who was commander of the American Expeditionary Forces in World War I, infantry wins battles, but logistics wins wars. Now, we are definitely not at war here, but as we know, logistics is everything. And this next panel discussion will examine logistics, transport links, payment systems, standards, and much more. I now invite our esteemed moderator, Ms. Zain Asher of CNN International. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together. Session number 3.
All right, welcome back, everybody. So, we talked a lot earlier about some of the hurdles that are impeding trade between Africa and the Caribbean. And for this next session, one of our latest sessions, I think the goal is really to focus on some of the solutions, right? Where do we go from here? How do we really maintain some of the progress that we've seen over the past year or so? And that means overcoming key hurdles, such as air bridges and the lack of transportation between Africa and the Caribbean. It means working out regulation, logistics, transportation costs, infrastructure. There are so many hurdles, and so my panelists are going to be speaking about the specific ways in which we can overcome those hurdles. Before we get to the panel, though, I'd like to please welcome the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Suriname, Albert Ramdin, to give the keynote address.
Okay, good evening, good afternoon. I only came for this panel because of the moderator, okay? Just to make sure. Just to make sure. No, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. I know it's late in the day and I've been asked to be relatively brief so that I can help the panel move on and go to the reception, which is hosted so kindly by President Irfan Ali. I'm from Suriname, that's next door, so I'm always pleased to be in Guyana. And we're going to discuss something here about logistics, supply chain, connectivity, in many ways, virtual and physical. But I believe since this morning, we have heard so much already about it. Many speakers have spoken about it, up to the last panel even. So I don't want to go too deep into it because I want to reflect also on what has been said by the leaders. And we have a panel coming up which will speak much more to the point on logistics, transport links, payment systems, and so on. What I have heard this morning from presidents and from the president of the Afrexim Bank is very key for us. We are at a turning point, I believe. We have spoken about the challenges we face today, challenges which have an impact on our lives, on our productivity, on our social life in general, and not much we can do about it, it seems, if we look at the global challenges. So what we heard today from President Ali, and I congratulate him on this because this is what this region requires, is visionary statements and action on how we move from this issue, this problem, into an opportunity for change. And so all these crises which we have today, we must take as an opportunity as well, because there are opportunities. And I'll say this. Later on, Prime Minister Motley went into it as well. It is critically important that our region, a small region of 18, 19 million people, is able to become a prosperous community again. Devoided from all kinds of threats which we face in terms of climate change, in terms of economic resilience, in terms of debt burden. This community of 19 million people, but if you stretch it further to the wider Caribbean, we're speaking about 250 million people, it must become a relationship between, and that's the opportunity, a relationship between us and Africa. And basically, you would ask yourself, what connects two regions, apart from the historical aspect, which has been discussed earlier. But these are two. One is a continent, the other one is a sub-region. And the differences are large. But again, because of visionary leadership, we see an opportunity here to work with institutions which can finance development. The region, our region, in my own view, in my experience, has been for too long tied up with traditional financial architecture of the world. And we have not looked beyond, that. So today, with the Afrexim Bank, we have an opportunity. And earlier was mentioned also India. We have opportunities to come out of that cycle. We are very loan dependent in this region. And that's why we have a debt burden, which we seem not to be able to come out of it. With partners like the Afrexim Bank, we can at least start increasing our productive capacity to be able to produce ourselves, to generate, to earn money, to be able to pay for debt, instead of taking loans after loans to close your budget, because that is what has been happening. So here is an opportunity, in practical sense, to change our financial architecture and financing architecture in the region. That's one. And logistics will play a critical role. President Ali said, we can produce whatever we want. If we can't ship it, if we can't sell it, it doesn't make any sense. And a lot can be done here. If we want to bring tourists, we don't even have a direct connection, as far as I'm aware, between Africa. Western Africa is close to South America. We don't even have a direct connection by air. So there is an opportunity there for the region to try to link up with African companies. So there is an urgency, there is an opportunity here. And there's a unique opportunity because if we let this one go, we'll still depend on the traditional relationships which we have built over time. Before I go to the issue about pooling resources, I think it's critically important because it's not only something for the private sector to work on. We always speak about the private sector has to do this and that, but it's the governments as well. And there's a role for the government because all of this will not happen if there is not sufficient exchange of information, knowledge on the ground. And how do you do business if you don't know what is the offering, what is in each other's territory? So our governments are very poorly represented in terms of diplomatic presence in Africa. There are only a few countries which are represented, and then in one or two countries. I think there is need for a strategic approach to increase that political presence, to build trust with the African leaders. I see it growing every single time, but we need to build on that, because I can tell you one thing: relationships are built on two things. One is trust, and that one you can't foster through virtual means. You need to talk, you need to meet, you need to see eye to eye on issues of common concern. And we have a lot of issues in the world which are a common concern. And the second one upon which a relationship is built, and if you want to bring it further, is built on interest, whether that's political interest or economic, financial interest. Both are critical. Decision-making in this world, let us not fool ourselves, is based on interest. There is a lot of ideology in it, but it's based on interest ultimately. Of course, the Afrexim Bank would want to invest in this region, but it is not at no cost. There must be a business proposition which is beneficial as well. We have to be very realistic about it. So we have to change our mindset as well. But the first thing we should do is facilitate, through the governments, more diplomatic presence in the region. And the same goes for Africa in this region. It will provide for channels of communication, it will provide for information, it will provide for sharing information, and all of that will facilitate. The second thing that needs to be done is connect private sectors. I'm happy that there is an Africa CARICOM Business Council, but it should go even further than that. I can tell you, when we speak about port authorities in this region to connect and to pool resources, they need to come together, connect with Africa jointly. The same goes for logistics, supply chain, and the banking sector in terms of payment systems, in terms of standards. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be done, but it won't happen if we don't pool our resources together. What I want to say in the end is this. Why do we do this? Why do we want to enhance trading relations? One of them I already mentioned, but there are two reasons. First of all, and I'm very pleased with the visionary statement of President Ali, and I think this region has the right leadership collectively at the moment to break out that cycle, to break that traditional approach, and is to break our dependencies, to break the historically related relationships which we have built over the past 40, 50 years, 60 years since independence has not changed. And now we are trying to change it to other territories, Southeast Asia, India, and Africa, because that's where the future is. I'm surprised up to today that in the past 30, 35 years since the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific Countries exists, that we never spoke about creating a trading bloc among these countries. That would be the second largest trading bloc in the world, and it's still possible. So this is something which we need to facilitate. That would create more indigenous South-South business and cooperation. So one is to break that dependency, and the second one is, of course, to create sustainable prosperity. Let me end by saying this. All these important things, if we have products to sell, if we have services to sell, if we want to traffic people, will not happen if we don't get the private sector to pool its resources. It's something which the Caribbean private sector really has to look into seriously, is how do we build more synergies, how do we work together and not become competitors of our own. We are too much isolated or much more operating within as an island, but that is not going to work in this current economic environment and financial environment globally. So I hope that this opportunity which has been created, and I want to congratulate Guyana for hosting this event after Barbados did that. It is the starting point of a new opportunity for the region to chart its course, its path towards real sustainable development, and hopefully in 10, 15 years, we can speak about a productive, not only financial, but a productive society that can sustain itself. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Minister Ramden. I loved what the minister said there when he said, we can produce whatever we want, but if we can't ship it and we can't sell it, then it doesn't make any sense. And I really do want to focus this particular session on overcoming obstacles and being much more specific in terms of how we do that. And so I'm going to introduce my panelists. Please welcome Dr. Peter Ramsarup, the Chief Investment Officer of Guyana Invest. Kay Greenwich, the CEO of Invest Barbados. Darwin Telemonk, the CEO of Port Management Association of the Caribbean. Mike Owalu, the CEO of the Pan-African Payment Settlement Systems, or PAPS. Natasha Walcott, the Senior Advisor of the Caribbean Export Development Agency. And Nazim Nordali, the COO of the IFDC.